Hello, everyone, and either welcome or welcome back to the Gender Libertarian Podcast. If you do like this, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, YouTube, and on my Patreon page where you do get early access to my episodes and exclusive content. Link will be down in the show notes. Well, guys, it is officially official. Whether you love it, hate it, don't care about it, or just wish it would all go away, as of today, December 5th, Nancy Pelosi has called for articles of impeachment to be written up against Donald Trump. So, what I wanted to do is to go over the executive summary for the House Intelligence Report. They released the full report on Tuesday, and it is a very long report with lots of things in it. And even this executive summary is incredibly long. Like, I was going to read it, and then I was just like, this episode would be like hours and hours long. So what I want to do is I'm going to read certain sections of it, kind of explain other sections. And so you can kind of get an idea of what is in this report that House Intelligence gathered from the 1,100 hours of testimony that was given both privately and publicly. And to, at the end, kind of give my predictions on what articles of impeachment are going to be. And we'll see how right I end up being. I don't know exactly when the articles of impeachment are going to be written up and made public. This timeline kind of got sped up a bit. I don't think anybody really expected Pelosi to come out today and announce that they need to be written. So we shall see. I don't know. This is all kind of now on a somewhat expedited timeline, and there's plenty of people who have plenty of things to say about that, just like everything else in this impeachment hearing, because, yeah. Anyway, let me go ahead and read the summary to the executive summary. Which that sounds kind of ridiculous, but that tells you kind of how long this is. But I think this really kind of gives the idea of what exactly is in this report. And for what it's worth, I will put the link to the whole executive summary down in the show notes too, if you wish to read it. I do suggest it, if for nothing else, than to kind of get a grip on the timeline of events, because I feel like this does a really good job of kind of explaining time-wise when what happened to who and where. And it's because this whole thing, I think, to a lot of people who don't follow this, and even to those of us who do follow it, it can get very confusing because there's a lot of stuff going on. So if you're interested in kind of getting a grip on, like I said, the timeline, kind of hitting the highlights of some of the testimony from the past month, 3 weeks, month, however long we've been doing this now. And it also gives kind of the key findings. And like I said, I think this really gives a lot of clues as to what the articles of impeachment are going to look like. So let's go ahead and read the summary of the summary. The impeachment inquiry into Donald J. Trump, the 45th President of the United States, uncovered a months-long effort by President Trump to use the powers of his office to solicit foreign interference on his behalf in the 2020 election. As described in this executive summary and the report that follows, President Trump's scheme subverted U.S. foreign policy towards Ukraine and undermined our national security in favor of two politically motivated investigations that would help his presidential re-election campaign. The president demanded that the newly elected Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky, publicly announce investigations into a political rival that he apparently feared the most, former Vice President Joe Biden, and into a discredited theory that it was Ukraine, not Russia, that interfered in the 2016 presidential election. To compel the Ukrainian president to do his political bidding, President Trump conditioned two official acts on the public announcement of the investigations: a coveted White House visit and critical U.S. military assistance Ukraine needed to fight its Russian adversary. During a July 25, 2019 phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky expressed gratitude for U.S. military assistance. President Trump immediately responded by asking President Zelensky to do us a favor, though, and openly pressed for Ukraine to investigate former Vice President Biden and the 2016 conspiracy theory. In turn, President Zelensky assured President Trump that he would pursue the investigation and reiterated his interest in the White House meeting. Although President Trump's scheme intentionally bypassed many career personnel. It was undertaken with the knowledge and approval of senior administration officials, including President's acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and Secretary of Energy Rick Perry. In fact, at a press conference weeks after the public revelations about the scheme, Mr. Mulvaney publicly acknowledged that the president directly tied the hold on military aid to his desire to get Ukraine to conduct a political investigation, telling Americans to get over it. President Trump and his senior officials may see nothing wrong with using the power of the office of the president to pressure a foreign country to help the president's re-election campaign. Indeed, President Trump continues to encourage Ukraine and other foreign countries to engage in the same kind of election interference today. However, the Founding Fathers prescribed a remedy for this chief executive who places his personal interests above those of the country: impeachment. Accordingly, as part of the House of Representatives impeachment inquiry, the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, in coordination with the Committees on Oversight and Reform and Foreign Affairs, were compelled to undertake a serious, sober, and expeditious investigation into whether the president's misconduct warranted that remedy. In response, President Trump engaged in an unprecedented campaign of obstruction of this impeachment inquiry. Nevertheless, due in large measure to patriotic and courageous public servants who provided the committee with direct evidence of the president's actions, the committees uncovered significant misconduct on the part of the President of the United States. As required under House Resolution 660, the Intelligence Committee, in consultation with the Committees on Oversight and Reform and Foreign Affairs, have prepared this report to detail the evidence uncovered to date, which will now be transmitted to the Judiciary Committee for its consideration. So, as you can tell from that opener, this report basically finds that President Trump did withhold the Ukrainian aid and the White House meeting in order to try to force Ukraine into these two investigations that would be politically expedient for President Trump. So, there's that. That is the finding of this report. And I want to go ahead and just put it out there right now, and I will probably reiterate this at the end of this episode. At no point has anybody from the White House offered any kind of alternate plausible explanation for these events that have happened. They do not dispute that these events happened. Nobody has given a good reason as to why the aid was withheld for 55 days. Nobody has given any kind of alternate explanation as to why these events took place. Nobody has disputed that these events took place. That's fucking wild. Their only defense is that, is this impeachable or not? I will give my opinions on that at the end of this episode because I kind of want to get through the rest of this before we get there. But I just, like I said, I want to put it out there. Nobody disputes that any of this happened. Nobody disputes that it happened in the way that it has been detailed by either this report or any witnesses that have been called to testify before the House Intelligence Committee. Nobody has said that any of those people lied. So, the sequence of events is undisputed. Whatever you may happen to think about this sequence of events, that is up to you. But, here we go. First section of this. The president conditioned a White House meeting and military aid to Ukraine on a public announcement of investigations beneficial to his re-election campaign. So, first section of that is the president's request for a political favor, which goes over the July 25th phone call, which has been discussed ad infinitum, and I've certainly discussed it too. I think everybody knows what was said in the July 25th call at this point. An interesting thing that is in this section, though, is that apparently before the July 25th call, Ambassador Sondland had 6 days earlier contacted President Zelensky and told him that he needed to say certain things in the phone call in order to make sure that he gets the military aid and the White House meeting. There have been plenty of people who have made arguments about when Zelensky knew what as in regards to like the military aid, but it is known that other Ukrainian officials before the July 25th call were aware of the fact that these funds had been held up, and in fact, Trump had actually put the hold on the funds about a month earlier. So it was noticed in Ukraine that our bank account is a little light, and what's up with that? Whether Zelensky knew that for a fact on July 25th, I don't know. Some people say yes, some people say no. But it wasn't an unknown thing in Ukraine, and it also wasn't an unknown thing in the United States either. And there were lots of people who had lots of problems with this. Like once the decision to freeze aid went through, I mean, DOD had a problem with it, Department of State had a problem with it, NSC had a problem with it. Yeah. And for what it's worth, all of those organizations plus Congress did not have a single issue with releasing these funds to Ukraine. Nobody, just Trump. So this was a unilateral withholding of funds by Trump, and there is plenty of question as to whether or not that was entirely legal or not, but we shall get there. Anyway, next section is the president removed anti-corruption champion Ambassador Yovanovitch, and this section discusses kind of what ended up happening with Yovanovitch as far as there being a smear campaign against her in order to discredit her, in order to get her fired. And it's alleged that this was all done at the behest of one Rudy Giuliani. And of course, Rudy Giuliani is the president's personal lawyer. And so Giuliani has always been pretty upfront about the fact that he was doing this at the behest of his client, Donald Trump. So this whole idea that he was on some clandestine bumblefuck mission to do this is like, no. Mm-mm. Anyway, next section, the president's handpicked agents behind the scheme, kind of goes a little bit into what happened after Yovanovitch was, well, fired, I guess, for lack of a better term, kind of smeared out of office, and how basically we ended up putting Rick Perry, Sondland, and Kurt Volker in charge of things. And essentially what ends up happening here is this also discusses the trip that Vice President Pence was supposed to make to Zelensky's inauguration, which didn't happen. Instead, they sent those three guys, and for what it's worth, when they came back, they all had nothing but praise for President Zelensky, which this refutes another talking point that I see all the time, which is that, oh, Trump withheld it because Ukraine is some kind of corrupt nation, and nobody ever really explains that. But the three men that did go to the inauguration and who did speak with Zelensky all said, yeah, he's good. He's good people. He's on the up and up. He's got great plans to continue this anti-corruption campaign. Schedule the meet. President Trump did not want to schedule the meet because he still had it in his head that somehow Ukraine was responsible for something. Like, this whole conspiracy theory, just, I don't understand it. It makes my brain hurt. But, yeah. So, this idea that there was some kind of legitimate anti-corruption reason for withholding this money? Nope. So, next section. President Trump froze vital military assistance. Now, the part in this particular section that's really important, again, to kind of keep the timeline in your head. By July 3rd, OMB blocked a congressional notification which would have cleared the way for the release of $141 million in State Department security assistance funds. By July 12th, President Trump had placed a hold on all military support funding for Ukraine. On July 18th, OMB announced the hold to all the relevant agencies and indicated that it was directed by the president. No other reason was provided. So, what ends up happening is on the 12th, President Trump unilaterally withholds the funds. On July 18th, OMB tells everybody. That's when shit starts hitting the fan. Because now, all of a sudden, you've got the DOD asking questions, you've got NSC asking questions, you've got Congress asking questions. This is when things kind of start to go sideways. Obviously, we do not know about the whistleblower complaint yet. There is some discussion. I mean, that's apparently Trump was briefed in August on the whistleblower complaint, which also led to the release of the funds. But yeah, so basically middle of July is when everybody finds out these funds are withheld and people start going like, what in the actual fuck is going on here? Anyway, next section. The president conditioned a White House meeting on investigations. And, I mean, that pretty much sums up that. The funny thing in this section, though, and it goes over kind of how this exactly went down. Here's what I think is kind of the relevant part of this. Following these discussions, Dr. Hill reported back to Ambassador Bolton, who told her to go and tell the NSC legal advisor that I am not part of whatever drug deal Sondland and Mulvaney are cooking up on this. Both Dr. Hill and Lieutenant Colonel Vindman separately reported the incident to the NSC legal advisor. So, when John Bolton was read in on this, John fucking Bolton was like, nope, don't put my name on this. I want nothing to do with this. I'm out. Get me the hell away from this. John Bolton could figure out that this was a bad idea. That should have been your sign that maybe this is not so good. But no, we keep going. Next section, the president's agents pursue a drug deal. And this kind of goes over the more timeline kind of stuff. And here is what is interesting in this section, because I want you to remember a certain person's name. I think there's about to be some shit hitting the fan here. On July 19th, Ambassador Volker had present with Mr. Giuliani and his associate Lev Parnas. Remember Lev Parnas' name. You're going to be hearing it a lot more in the near future. At the Trump Hotel in Washington, D.C. Mr. Parnas would subsequently be indicted for campaign finance violations as part of an investigation that remains ongoing. During the conversation, Ambassador Volker stressed his belief that the attacks being leveled against Vice President Biden related to Ukraine were false, and that the former vice president was a person of integrity. He counseled Mr. Giuliani that the Ukrainian prosecutor pushing the false narrative, Mr. Lysenko, was promoting a self-serving narrative to preserve himself in power. Mr. Giuliani agreed, but his promotion of Mr. Lysenko's false accusations for the benefit of President Trump did not cease. Ambassador Volker also helped to arrange an in-person meeting between Mr. Giuliani and Andrei Yermak, one of President Zelensky's most trusted advisors, which would take place in Madrid, Spain in early August. So yeah. Even once Giuliani was told that some of the things that he was saying were less than truthful, he still kept saying them because it served a certain purpose. And like I said, Lev Parnas, you're going to hear more about him soon. So skipping forward a little bit, like there's kind of a lot going on here. The president pressed Zelensky to do a political favor. Again, kind of going over what was going on behind the scenes as far as what Zelensky was being told to do. Yeah, there's yep. So pretty much, I think I've pretty much gone over most of this. And this is also in this section, the David Holmes part comes up, the part where on July 26th that Ambassador Sondland had that call with President Trump, where President Trump asked about the investigations and the whole conversation about how he didn't give a shit about Ukraine. Yeah, that's when that happened. So I'm going to skip forward a little bit to the section of the president's security assistant hold became public, because now we're establishing timelines of when everybody found out about this. On August 28th, Politico published a story revealing President Trump's weeks-long hold on U.S. military assistance to Ukraine. Senior Ukrainian officials expressed grave concern, deeply worried about the practical impact on their efforts to fight Russian aggression, but also about the public message that is sent to the Russian government, which would almost certainly seek to exploit any real or perceived crack in U.S. resolve towards Ukraine. On August 29th, at the urging of National Security Advisor Bolton, Ambassador Taylor wrote a first-person cable to Secretary Pompeo. This was the only first-person cable the ambassador had ever sent in his decades of government service. He explained the folly of withholding security assistance to Ukraine as it fought a hot war against Russia on its own borders. He wrote that he could not and would not defend such a policy. Ambassador Taylor stated that Secretary Pompeo may have carried the cable with him to a meeting in the White House. So, August 28th, everybody in the whole wide world finds out that there is indeed there's a hold on the military funds. And again, shit starts really going sideways about now, because now this is Now everybody knows, and people are starting to ask a whole hell of a lot of questions. Yeah. Let's see. Let's skip forward a little bit to... Oh, yes, the infamous quid pro quo text message between Taylor and Sondland. On September 7th, President Trump and Ambassador Sondland spoke. Ambassador Sondland stated to his colleague that the president said there is no quid pro quo, but that President Zelensky would be required to announce the investigations in order for the hold on security assistance to be lifted, and that he should want to do it. Ambassador Sondland passed on a similar message directed to President Zelensky and Mr. Yermak that, although this was not a quid pro quo, if President Zelensky did not clear things up in public, we would be at a stalemate, referring to the hold on security assistance. Arrangements were made for the Ukrainian president to make a public statement during an interview on CNN. So even once this whole shit show became public, there was still pressure being put on Zelensky to make a public announcement of an investigation. You would think at some point you realize your jig is up. Not this group. Nope. So, anyway, skipping forward a little bit here. So, in the next section, the president's scheme unraveled. On September 9th, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, the Committees on Oversight and Reform, and the Committee on Foreign Affairs announced an investigation into the scheme by President Trump and his personal attorney, Mr. Giuliani, to improperly pressure the Ukrainian government to assist the president's bid for re-election. The committees sent document production and preservation requests to the White House and the State Department related to the investigation. NSC staff members believe this investigation may have had the effect of releasing the hold on Ukrainian military assistance because it would have been potentially politically challenging to justify that hold. You think? Yeah, it would be a little difficult to explain why this hold was being put on this money. Later that day, the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community sent a letter to Chairman Schiff and Ranking Member Nunes notifying the committee that a whistleblower had filed a complaint on August 12th that the ICIG had determined to be both an urgent concern and credible. Nevertheless, the acting director of national intelligence took the unprecedented step of withholding the complaint from the Congressional Intelligence Committees in coordination with the White House and Department of Justice. Now, this is where you start getting into some serious obstruction stuff. Because you can't just not tell the House Intelligence Committee about a whistleblower complaint. Nor can you not tell the Senate Intelligence Committee about a whistleblower complaint. And you also can't just blanket hold information coming out of the State Department. So, all this happens on September 9th. And it is found out that the complaint was filed on August 12th. Anyway. And here we go. The White House had been aware of the whistleblower complaint for several weeks, and press reports indicate that the president was briefed on it in late August. The ICIG's notification to Congress of the complaint's existence and the announcement of a separate investigation into the same subject matter telegraphed to the White House that attempts to condition the security assistance on the announcement of the political investigations beneficial to Trump and the efforts to cover up that misconduct would not last. Now, the important thing to kind of realize here is that Zelensky was going to go through with it. He was going to go on CNN and make an announcement. If not for the fact that everybody found out what was going on and found out way later than they should have because the White House sat on this information. I mean, people tried to make the argument that because this didn't actually happen, that it doesn't matter. Yes, it does matter. It was going to happen. It came real close to happening. And if not for the whistleblower complaint becoming public, it would have happened. Like, attempted robbery is still robbery. Attempted bribery is still bribery. Like, just because you weren't successful because things happened doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're not guilty of something. So, anyway, next section, the president's chief of staff confirmed aid was conditioned on investigations, which we've kind of already discussed that. The infamous Mick Mulvaney press conference where he told everybody, this man told everybody in a press conference that, yes, part of the reason why this aid was withheld was to force these investigations and that everybody should get over it. That happened. That fucking happened. He admitted to it. Like, that's why I'm so blown away that anybody is like baffled as to what the hell's going on. You've been told. Mulvaney said it. Trump said it. I mean, I don't understand how you admit to doing things into a hot mic and then still have people defend you. I don't get it. Anyway, moving on. So Section 2 of the executive summary details the various and assorted ways that President Trump has interfered to obstruct this impeachment process by both telling the State Department to not release certain documents, by telling certain people, even people who have been subpoenaed, to not go testify. He has been very clear that he has no intentions of actually being involved in any of this. So, yeah, there's a lot of really damning information in here, and I don't see how anybody can kind of make the argument that there isn't an obstruction of justice angle to be had here, because you're specifically instructing various agencies to tell the House to go fuck themselves, basically. You're using the executive branch to try to withhold information from the legislative branch, which these branches, if everybody remembers their separation of powers, are supposed to be co-equal, and that is not something that should be allowed or tolerated. I mean, even Nixon knew better than to try to keep people from testifying and to try to sit on documents and recordings. Even Nixon could figure this out. Like, you can't do that. So anyway, there's a lot here about just the various details of just like letters that White House counsel has sent over to Nancy Pelosi and House Intelligence, basically saying, we're not cooperating. Fuck you. Which again, can't do that. See, we got the president's refusal to produce any and all subpoenaed documents, which that's another thing. Just straight up ignoring subpoenas. That's not good. That's obstruction. Let's see. The president's refusal to allow top aides to testify, which this is a great list here. At President Trump's direction, 12 current or former administration officials refused to testify as part of the House's impeachment inquiry, 10 of who did so in defiance of duly authorized subpoenas. Mick Mulvaney, acting White House Chief of Staff. Robert B. Blair, Assistant to the President and Senior Advisor to the Chief of Staff. Ambassador John Bolton, former National Security Advisor. John A. Eisenberg, Deputy Counsel to the President for National Security Affairs and Legal Advisor, National Security Council. Michael Ellis, Senior Associate Counsel to the President and Deputy Legal Advisor, National Security Council. Preston Wells Griffin, Senior Director for International Energy and Environment, National Security Council. Dr. Charles M. Kupperman, former Deputy Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs, National Security Council. Russell T. Voigt, Acting Director, Office of Management and Budget. Michael Duffy, Associate Director for National Security Programs, Office of Management and Budget. Brian McCormick, Associate Director for Natural Resources, Energy and Science, Office of Management and Budget. T. Ulrich Breichbull, Counselor, Department of State. Secretary Rick Perry, Department of Energy. These witnesses were warned that their refusal to testify shall constitute evidence that may be used against you in a contempt proceeding and may be used as an adverse inference against you and the president. So, yeah, blocking documents being handed over to Congress, telling people to defy subpoenas, I mean, that's obstruction. There's nothing else really to call it. And that's not even counting the fact that Giuliani has refused to go. And he's been subpoenaed. And yeah, it's just, and then we get into the intimidation of witnesses, which I don't know how I feel about that, because it really centers around tweets and things that are said in that sort of fashion, which I don't know. But it certainly wasn't an advisable thing for Trump to do. I'll say that. Like, if somebody is testifying, don't make a tweet about them threatening them. Like, don't do that. Like, this shouldn't be hard to understand, but here we are. So, anyway, Now we're kind of getting to the end, and this is the part I kind of want to read verbatim, because this part right here, I think, sets up what we're going to see in the articles of impeachment. Key findings of fact. Based on witness testimony and evidence collected during the impeachment inquiry, the intelligence community has found that 1. Donald J. Trump, the 45th President of the United States, acting personally and through his agents within and outside the U.S. government, solicited the interference of a foreign government, Ukraine, in the 2020 U.S. presidential election. The president engaged in this course of conduct for the benefit of his re-election, to harm the election prospects of a political opponent, and to influence our nation's upcoming presidential election to his advantage. In so doing, the president placed his personal political interest above the national interest of the United States, sought to undermine the integrity of the U.S. presidential election process, and endangered U.S. national security. Number 2. In furtherance of this scheme, President Trump, directing and acting through his agents within and outside the U.S. government, sought to pressure and induce Ukraine's newly elected president, Vladimir Zelensky, to publicly announce unfounded investigations that would benefit President Trump's personal political interests and re-election efforts. To advance his personal political objectives, President Trump encouraged the president of Ukraine to work with his personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. Number 3. As part of this scheme, President Trump, acting in his official capacity and using his position of public trust, personally and directly requested from the President of Ukraine that the government of Ukraine publicly announce investigations into 1. The president's political opponent, former Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr. and his son Hunter Biden, and 2. A baseless theory promoted by Russia alleging that Ukraine, rather than Russia, interfered in the 2016 U.S. election. These investigations were intended to harm a potential political opponent of President Trump and benefit the president's domestic political standing. Number 4. President Trump ordered the suspension of $391 million in vital military assistance urgently needed by Ukraine, a strategic partner, to resist Russian aggression. Because the aid was appropriated by Congress on a bipartisan basis and signed into law by the president, its expenditure was required by law. Acting directly and through his subordinates within the U.S. government, the president withheld from Ukraine this military assistance without any legitimate foreign policy, national security, or anti-corruption justification. The president did so despite the long-standing bipartisan support of Congress, uniform support across federal departments and agencies for the provision to Ukraine of the military assistance, and his obligations under the Impeachment Control Act. This one right here, this is the one for me. Under the Impeachment Control Act, the president cannot unilaterally rescind funds that were appropriated by Congress unless he can offer a damn good explanation as to why he broke the law. He broke the law. Like, there it is. I mean, and like I've said, there has been no explanation given to anybody as to why this money was withheld. Not a one. Not to the public, not to Congress, not to OMB, not to DOD, not to the NSC, not to anybody. So I don't know what else there is to say there. I mean, nobody disputes it happened. Nobody says that didn't happen. So what the hell, people? Anyway, number 5. President Trump used the powers of the office of the president and exercised his authority over the executive branch, including his control of the instruments of the federal government, to apply increasing pressure on the president of Ukraine and the Ukrainian government to announce the politically motivated investigations desired by President Trump. Specifically, to advance and promote his scheme, the president withheld official acts of value to Ukraine and conditioned their fulfillment on actions by Ukraine that would benefit his personal political interests. A. President Trump, acting through agents within and outside the U.S. government, conditioned a head of state meeting at the White House with the president of Ukraine desperately sought to demonstrate continued U.S. support for Ukraine in the face of Russian aggression on Ukraine, publicly announcing the investigations that President Trump believed would aid his re-election campaign. B. To increase leverage over the president of Ukraine, President Trump, acting through his agents and subordinates, conditioned release of this vital military assistance he has suspended to Ukraine on the president of Ukraine's public announcement that the investigations that President Trump sought. C. President Trump's closest subordinates and advisors within the executive branch, including Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Secretary of Energy Richard Perry, and other senior White House and executive branch officials had knowledge of, in some cases facilitated and furthered the president's scheme, and withheld information about the scheme from Congress and the American public. 6. In directing and orchestrating this scheme to advance his personal political interest, President Trump did not implement, promote, or advance U.S. anti-corruption policies. In fact, the president sought to pressure and induce the government of Ukraine to announce a politically motivated campaign lacking legitimate predication that the U.S. government otherwise discourages and opposes as a matter of policy in that country and around the world. In doing so, the president undermined U.S. policy supporting anti-corruption reform and the rule of law in Ukraine and undermined U.S. national security. 7. By withholding vital military assistance and diplomatic support from a strategic foreign partner government engaged in an ongoing military conflict illegally instigated by Russia, President Trump compromised national security to advance his personal political interest. 8. Faced with the revelation of his actions, President Trump publicly and repeatedly persisted in urging foreign governments, including Ukraine and China, to investigate his political opponent. This continued solicitation of foreign interference in a U.S. election presents a clear and present danger that the president will continue to use his power of office for personal political gain. 9. Using the power of the office of the president and exercising his authority over the executive branch, President Trump ordered and implemented a campaign to conceal his conduct from the public and frustrate and obstruct the House of Representatives impeachment inquiry by A. Refusing to produce the impeachment inquiry's investigating committee's information and records in the possession of the White House in defiance of a lawful subpoena. B. Directing executive branch agencies to defy lawful subpoenas and withhold the production of all documents and records from investigating committees. C. Directing current and former executive branch officials not to cooperate with the committees, including in defiance of lawful subpoena for testimony. And D. Intimidating, threatening, and tampering with prospective and actual witnesses in the impeachment inquiry in an effort to delay, prevent, or influence the testimony of those witnesses. In so doing, and despite the fact that the Constitution vests in the House of Representatives the sole power of impeachment, the president sought to arrogate to himself the right to determine the propriety, scope, and nature of an impeachment inquiry into his own misconduct, and the right to deny any and all information to the Congress in the conduct of its constitutional responsibilities. Whew. Okay, so that is the executive summary of the House Intelligence Committee report. My predictions on what the articles of impeachment will be based on reading this, I think that there will be 4. And I would say 4 is a good number. I don't think I would do less. I don't think I would do more. Number 1, pretty clearly, there's going to be an obstruction of justice. Number 2, there's going to be an article related to the impoundment clause and his violation of the impoundment clause. I'd say Article 3 is going to be something along the lines of endangering the national security of the United States. And number 4 is going to be something related to abuse of power. That's my prediction. I think the two that definitely, well, in a sane world, where everybody hadn't already made up their own damn minds before a syllable of testimony was heard, I think the two strongest ones would be the obstruction of justice, because, I mean, he's admitted to it. Like, it's blatant. Like, he has point blank said that he has told people not to cooperate, that he has instructed the State Department not to cooperate. I mean, there's really no arguing that. And also the impoundment clause one, because, again, nobody disputes that happened. And unless somebody would like to, in the Senate trial, offer up a good-ass explanation as to why Trump unilaterally withheld congressionally approved funds, I mean, you're guilty. You did it. Like, so much of this shit has already been admitted to in public. Like, I'm just like, oh my God, what in the hell? But, like I said, in a sane world. But we don't live in a sane world. I already know what's going to happen in the Senate, and that bothers me. Because honestly, I mean, you can maybe argue the abuse of power one. I mean, to me, it's a pretty blatant abuse of power. And you could ask, oh no, I forgot one. Asking a foreign entity to interfere in an election. That one is going to be on there too. which actually I'd probably sub out the abuse of power one for that, because that would be a more crystallized argument to be made. I mean, because abuse of power, like, you could make that argument, but that soliciting foreign interference would be a much more specific charge, and I am sure that one is going to be in there. Like that. I mean, it's pretty blatant. I mean, I don't know what else. I mean, I'm very interested to see what kind of defense Team Trump puts up in a Senate trial, if they plan on, like, participating at all, which if you don't, that's fucking stupid. Like, you're on trial. Like, you better fucking send somebody to show up and defend your ass. In fact, you should probably get your ass over there and defend your ass. So, anyway, like I said, I'm not sure when articles of impeachment are going to be made public, but those are my predictions, and I think that I will probably be pretty damn close to what ends up coming out of the House. And then, of course, the next step is you have the articles of impeachment. You hold debates in the House, the full House, on the merits of the articles of impeachment, and then everybody votes, and then it goes to the Senate. I mean, it's going to clear the House. I mean, they have the votes, so there's that. It's not going to clear the Senate because they don't have the votes, and because apparently nobody actually gives a shit about actually looking at any of this and actually making a decision, because obviously everything is tribalistic and everything kind of sucks, and it doesn't matter. He could go shoot somebody on Fifth Ave and people will excuse it, because I don't understand why. He's done nothing good for the GOP. Like, I don't even understand why these people defend him. It blows my mind. Like, I would think that if you genuinely gave a shit about saving the GOP, you would get rid of Trump and put in President Pence, and then 2020 is pretty much a lock. Like, strategically speaking, like, that seems to be the play to me, but apparently I don't know. I do not know what the hell has gone on with people, but at this point, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up because my voice is about to give out. So, as always, if you did make it this far, thank you. And if you do like this, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, YouTube, and on my Patreon page. Take care, and until next time.